We're going to be looking at developing children's literacy skills, looking at play-based learning activities, or play-based events as I like to sometimes call them. We've drawn on your literacy guidebooks, so any more information you need, you could dip into those, and our wonderful early years learning framework. And talking about early years learning framework, just to remind you that it's got a great definition in Outcome 5 for literacy, and I'm hoping to talk to some of this today. As preschool teachers and early childhood educators, you will know that there is a multitude of ways that children can communicate with us, and Reggio coined that phrase, 100 languages of children, and I love that phrase because when you work very closely with children, you learn very quickly that they're skillful communicators in the arts, in drama, in music, media, and so on. When we talk about the skills of literacy, we're talking about listening, viewing, reading, using electronic texts, and being able to navigate that technological world in a way that helps us to present ideas and communicate what we are thinking, and helping children to develop confidence in the digital media area. I really love this quote from one of the readings that should be available to you. It's specifically about writing, but because we wanted to talk a little bit about how you can be intentional as a teacher and do intentional teaching in your play projects, I wanted to remind you about how important the role of the educator is. You're intentional about instruction and the opportunity to expose children to early literacy opportunities through that intentionality. My definition of intentional teaching is, and particularly where literacy is concerned, is to provide opportunities, to plan carefully, and then to make the most of opportunities as you're seeing the children, observing them, to step in and step out of the play so that you're very intentional about teaching at point of need, giving children an alternative idea that they might not have thought about, or taking them in a direction that they don't yet know about. And we'll be covering that in the examples that I'm going to show you today. For example, composing notes, writing, and spelling and forming letters and so on. That intentionality is going to be very much central to my talk, but also thinking about what do we mean when we talk about intentional teaching. When the EYLF was first presented in Western Australia, there was a lot of talk about we have to sit them down and teach them formally, and certainly in my definition, intentionality is not about formal learning, but it might be. So if you need to teach children actually some letters because they don't know them, and you think the best way to do that would be to teach them in a direct way, then that's intentional teaching. If you set up a play area in your centre because you deliberately want to introduce a topic to the children and you step back and you stay out of it while you're watching the children, you're being very intentional about that too. So intentionality can have a broad definition. Let me talk about literacy and play because it's nice to remind ourselves how important play is in the early years. In my thinking, play has definitely got an important role to play in early literacy education because it gives children an opportunity to practice. It gives opportunity for them to be curious about literacy. How am I going to write a W, or how am I going to make that W sound when I need to make this particular sign? And there are times when a child will do something that you'll think, oh, I would never have thought to teach them that. But because we had this play opportunity and they're asking, I'm going to talk to you about a pizza cafe, and I had a child, it was actually my classroom that project was taken from, and she was quite an advanced little reader and writer, and in the end I set her a task, because pizza's got 2 Z's. I want you to make a list of all the words you know with double Z's in them, and I can tell you there's not that many, thank goodness. I was pretty astounded when she came back with quite a little list, and she'd gone through Mum's fridge and she found mozzarella cheese, but it actually gave her a task. But I would never have asked the children to think about the double Z sound at that point. Play gives us an opportunity to do that and give them an opportunity to going places that we might not have thought about. Play also allows children to develop understanding of the power and purposes of literacy. Some children have already got that developed when they come into your centre or your school, and some still have learning to do. And of course, your intentional teaching and teacher modelling play a very important part here. It's giving children an opportunity to use literacy in authentic ways. When I was working in preschool, the children loved to build, and they would build with their blocks and it would get higher, and then they would get really thrilled about it and they didn't want to take it down. And one of the tasks they had to do was write a note to the cleaner to say, please don't knock my block building down, which they did on a regular basis because I used to take the signs away so they'd have to write it again. And so it gave them an authentic reason to write. Please don't knock down my block building. And some of the children that I was working with, they'd never had an opportunity to write. From my own personal observations, I don't think children are seeing people write as much as they used to. With the upshot of screens and mobile screens, people don't write. I don't write a shopping list. I've got an app for that. We don't have to take notes. We can take a photograph of what we're looking at. But it's important that we give children an opportunity to learn about that. The opportunity to use writing for an authentic purpose is something that I think in those preschool and early years is the power of school and the power of coming together in that group, because you can plan those activities for them. And obviously you'll be introducing the concepts of print and new vocabulary as you go along. Play also allows children to take control and power. We know that when children are playing, the power can change quite quickly. Having the power and to be in control and make choices about their literacy uses are very important. And of course, you as experienced educators will know when children lead, then it's important that you follow. You will know when to follow a child. When a child shows you that they're being powerful and that they're showing you something new, you will step back and let them take that power and then just help them with more language or help them with understanding letters and sounds or word recognition and so on. Apart from the opportunity to be powerful around literacy, I think too that play can afford children social and cultural opportunities. So an opportunity to share culture or to even explain their own culture, get to know it, and also the opportunity to interact with others in a positive way. And we'll talk more about that later when we get to looking at the types of skills that can come out of our play. I call them play episodes or play events, or play projects if you like. So there are three big ideas that I want you to think about as we're looking at the projects that I've got to show you. So the first one is that play-based opportunities and intentional teaching are essential to support early literacy learning and understanding. The notion that if I write a note to the cleaner will read the note and understand my message is a very important opportunity in a play-based way. Having children write notes and then hand them to another classroom or another group for the children to read. Leaving messages for the people that come next, those sorts of things. Being able to use the iPad to record their thinking on a short video so that it can be shared with other people is such a powerful thing. And I think that play-based opportunities give us a chance as educators to allow children to show us things that we might not have even thought about or didn't even know that they knew. Having that notion of the play-based opportunities is very important. The second big idea around literacy within play is the role of the adult. I can't begin to describe how important I think your role is in this area. Apart from the fact that you are going to be thinking about what play opportunities can I offer the children just in the pre-planning stage, to then the stage of the play itself and your role when children do engage in play. So there's a role there for adults to play with the children. Obviously, I don't expect that you would spend your whole time playing in a particular play episode. I think it's important that we set the children on a play trajectory, if you like, and we step in and out of the play to help extend it. Certainly the co-construction of text, so where children get stuck and they don't have the knowledge that they need or the skills that they need, that you are there at that point of need to help to extend. And this is the zone of proximal development, isn't it? You're sitting right there going, now what letter might come next if we were trying to spell this particular word? That intentional teaching to be there, you might decide as a teacher to deliberately and formally teach some aspects of literacy as well, based on what you've seen the children do in their play. The other thing, of course, is the modelling that you do, where we start thinking about, well, I'm going to bring those things in for you tomorrow. I think I might write myself a note and I might put it where I can see it so I don't forget to bring that book that I was talking to you about, or look up something on the internet and bring you some information in. And so you would model writing the note, or you might model writing perhaps some things on a list, so that the children can see not only that there is a purpose for literacy, but adults also have the same thinking processes. In the early years, that powerful role that you have as the early childhood educator, children really take that on board. They watch you, and when they see you writing, of course, you'll encourage them more. So that also becomes part of the intentionality of your teaching. The third big idea is providing children with opportunities to choose the way in which they use literacy in play. And play does afford this. So if we think of something a little bit more formal, like a classroom where the teacher has a phonics program and then we might do this activity and that activity, children don't have an opportunity to choose. It's this activity, then it's that activity. But when they're playing, they can have an opportunity to choose. So they can help each other to read, or they can help each other to write, or they can make decisions about how they're going to record their thinking, whether they draw it or they take a photograph of it or they label something. I'm trying to label this diagram, somebody needs to help me to do this spelling, and another child comes in and they support each other. So children can have the opportunity, that freedom to choose. That's what the play does for them. That opportunity to play, and you supporting the literacy and making the equipment available to them, that children can actually choose that this time I'm going to record it on a little video, or I'm going to write a note, or I'm going to draw a picture. Being able to extend their literacy in these play episodes gives that idea about setting up play as such a powerful context for children to choose. Certainly we don't give them that choice if we're asking them to do creative writing and say, do you want to choose to video that or photograph it? They just have to write. The KindyLink program in Western Australia was a 3-year pilot from 2016 to 2018. It's no longer in the pilot phase, so it's now gone into the implementation phase. The Education Department decided that they would like to support 3-year-olds which are not in our schools, specifically targeting Aboriginal families, driven by our state's literacy and numeracy results in NAPLAN, and we have a very, very clear message that our Indigenous children are not doing as well as they could. And so in order to think about how we can support Aboriginal education, this was one idea that the Western Australian government implemented. 37 schools were chosen for the first round of KindyLink, and basically it was a 3-year-old program where the children would attend with a parent or a carer. I think it was for about 6 hours a week, so 2 sessions, and they would come along with their family member, and the sessions themselves were planned by the early childhood teacher, and they were also supported by our Aboriginal education officer. So each setting had its own AEIO, they called, in Western Australia. So for 3 years, the playgroups were run and then they were evaluated. And they were run in remote, rural and regional areas in Western Australia. Some of the schools decided that they wouldn't just invite Aboriginal families. So some of the KindyLink programs were run purely with Aboriginal families, and some of them were run with a mix of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal families. And the whole idea, obviously, was to support children's development and learning, but also, just as importantly, was to forge those links between families and school, and also the community. Because some of those communities, the school is the community, and the families that live around it, they're quite small. But the whole idea was to help the families help their 3-year-olds to transition into school eventually, And as we know from a lot of the research around family literacy, when a child comes from a home environment whose literacy practices closely mirror those of the school, the child will transition a lot easier into school than if they come from a family where the literacy practices are not the same as school. So in families where there are no books read, no opportunity to write and draw, the children, when they get to school, it's like going to a foreign country. They go, what is this? Because when you think about school literacy, we sit them down, we read to them, we all sit together, we sing songs, we might chant a few letters and sounds, and that will be something quite foreign to some children who have not had that at home. So we could build the parents' understanding of school literacy and their confidence and their comfortableness with it. We could help the parents to have these practices to take home that would sit alongside their family literacy practices, whatever they might be, because we still wanted to recognise that obviously families were the children's first educators. It really was also to upskill or to give parents knowledge and educate knowledge about school practices, because actually when you think about school literacy, it's a whole different language, isn't it? It's like a foreign language if you don't understand some of the jargon that goes with it. The other thing too, of course, we would always encourage attendance. We were always wanting to encourage attendance, not just of Aboriginal children, but for all children, to make that regular attendance at school beyond the early years as well. So the Kindy Link program had quite a few noble aims. The pilot was run for 3 years, and across the board there was interesting statistics come out. More than 3/4 of the parents or the carers identified as the mother. You might not find that particularly unusual. English was one of the main languages spoken at home, but Aboriginal English was also very common across those sites. So some children might have been dealing with 2 or 3 languages at 3 if they had an Aboriginal dialect, if they had English and Aboriginal English as well, so quite complicated linguistic backgrounds that the children would bring. Mostly what the children spoke as they came to school would mirror what happened at home. So when they come to school as 3-year-olds and they're in their play group, they might be speaking Aboriginal English or they might be speaking their Aboriginal dialect, depending on what was mirrored at home. That in itself helped the educators to see that children also had other affordances and barriers that they may have to overcome in a linguistic way. There's about 3 or 4 different reports for Kindy Link. So if you're interested in following it up, if you just Google Kindy Link, some of those will pop up. Data was collected from surveys, but also from interviews with parents and carers. It was collected from journals that were written by the teacher educators and the Aboriginal education officers to say, how is this program going for your group? What types of things are happening? There's a whole range of findings. These particular 4 findings relate to family experience. Sometimes across the groups, families might initiate ideas, or they may be pulled from what the Aboriginal education officer knew was happening in the community to help support the learning of community, as well as bringing it into the school so that it could be shared. If there was a particular celebration or a particular way of life, then it might be brought into and used in the activities. In some respects, families were encouraged to contribute ideas for Kindy Link activities. They were also encouraged to participate in activities that were planned and organised by the educators and the Aboriginal education officer. Most of the activities, when they originally started using Kindy Link, they were using the Abecedarian approach learning activities, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with those. They're very oral language based, so lots and lots of singing and games and matching and talking. Mostly what was reported out of the findings was the Abecedarian activities had to be adapted because they weren't that engaging for the Aboriginal families at first. This is where the Aboriginal education officer made the bridge between the two, and they were able, with the help of the families, to adapt the activities to be the same skill but more relevant. A whole range of stuff has come out about how we can adapt those activities, and it's lovely to think that the flexibility was built into the program to make the activities more appealing to the family so that we could build up their confidence and also their knowledge around the types of activities that were needed. The other thing too was families found that they spent more time sharing books with children, and they also were noticed to be requesting more information about learning and also developmental milestones of the children. Here's a couple of examples of some of the games. These are the Abecedarian games. They're created and set out by the Aboriginal education officers to be used in the sessions as the families came in, and each one of them had different instructions that the family member who brought the child could sit with the child and work through it. And when they weren't particularly interesting, then the Aboriginal education officer was then able to recreate it. They helped the families to make the games while they were at the session, and they would be then able to take the game home and play it. So there was this lovely continuity between coming to school, engaging in these activities, having a copy of the game to bring home so that they could continue the game with the children at home. And that was a very successful strategy. Both the families and the educators commented in the evaluation about the strength of that. Okay, I'm going to present another project that also focuses on play-based learning and using a dramatic play area to support children's early literacy learning. What I've done here is I've taken out this list of 6 indicators from your literacy guidebooks. So when we produce and we plan and we present a play-based activity for children in our centres and classrooms, these are some of the things that can come out of it in terms of literacy learning. Providing an effective literacy learning environment. Developing speaking and listening skills, engaging children in meaningful reading and writing experiences, and also as educators, being able to carefully observe children through their play and using that to help us determine where they're at with their literacy skills and understandings, so that we can develop our programs further. Play-based learning gives us a fabulous opportunity to engage with parents and caregivers and families as well. When we sat down to plan this project, we decided that we had a few questions that we felt needed to be considered. Is this project going to be worth it? So here are some of the questions that we asked ourselves, and I think there's probably a whole stack of other ones you could ask. But really we wanted to make sure that the play activity was relevant to the children, that it made sense to them and it didn't sit outside of their understanding of the world. We wanted to figure out to what extent can we get the families involved too. Does the project have the capacity to build and extend their knowledge in literacy? That was pretty much a given for us. And in a sense, when we talk about intentionality, that was our intention. When we talk about guided play, we set up the activity to be a guided play project where, in a sense, we guided it by choosing that this is what we were going to do. Can the children be involved in creating and extending in the structured play or the guided play? And this is where we had to give up power as teacher, hand it over to the children and say, we can guide them, we can set it up, but we might not know where they're going to take us. So it was a co-construction, I suppose, of play activity. And then, does the project have a range of activities associated with it? And that was quite interesting and quite a tricky one for us. But as it turned out, what we decided to do in this particular project was that Caroline, being the protagonist, would come every week and she would bring some sort of a provocation or a difficult problem for us to solve. We set the program up, so I could say that the pre-planning was key to the project's success, and also the intentionality was also key. When we think about all those lovely literacy skills we're developing, but it does occur to me that we can take it that step further and look at the 21st century skills that are so talked about these days across STEM, the 6 C's of the 21st century skills. So that whole idea about thinking critically, how are we going to build that into the project? Obviously, we knew that the children would communicate clearly with us because we very carefully built in speaking and listening skills and writing and reading skills. And then, of course, we wanted the children to work collaboratively. We wanted them to embrace and acknowledge difference and culture, so we thought of ways that we could do that too. Certainly, we wanted them to think creatively. So along with thinking critically and problem solving, that whole creative thinking, and also making connections between what they know, what they've experienced in their community and their families, and what they bring to the play episode. What we decided to do was to set up a cafe, and this is not a new idea. We took a new approach in that we wanted to hand over most of the work to the children. The particular area that this occurred in was fairly low socioeconomic, so we weren't quite sure what experiences the children had and what knowledge they were bringing to the play episode. And so what we decided to do was we were going to kick the project off with a trip to the pizza shop, which was actually quite a remarkable thing now I think about it. 25 children going to the pizza shop. We lined it up with the pizza guy and he said, oh yeah, they can all come and make their own pizza, it'll be fine. And we thought that was a good idea until we actually got there. I think he nearly had a heart attack when we all walked in the door, because what happened was we opened up the opportunity to families, and of the 25 families we had about 23 people come as well, because they just thought it was a great idea, it was something they enjoyed doing, and so they all came as well. We had a ball, I have to say. In preparation to going to the pizza shop and making our own pizzas and having that common experience that we could draw on through the entire project, we got the children to think about interviewing the chef himself. What questions would we ask? We got them thinking about what literacy we would see, so all the environmental print. We actually also got them to survey their families, because this was an integrated project, so we were doing maths as well, for the toppings that they might like on their pizza. So who liked anchovies? You can see actually the vocabulary that's coming into this. Anchovies is not a word that we'd ask children to spell, even think about. It actually turned into a project where the families were supporting the children's literacy as well, because when you say to someone, I don't like capsicum on my pizza, and the child's going to say, how do you spell capsicum? And so you can see how it will snowball. And at school, we were backing that up with getting the children to read back the responses from the families. We set up this list. We're going to set up a pizza cafe in our classroom. What sort of things do we need to have, and what sort of things do we need to include? And I don't know if you can read all of those things. Some of them I don't even think I can interpret for you, but the children could certainly read back what they'd written, which is a very important part of that early writing and reading, as you would know. You can see that the adults were also given an opportunity to contribute, so we co-constructed. That list was left up for weeks, and the children kept coming back and adding stuff as they thought about it. Pleased to see one small boy sit down and try to write dishwasher, which was quite an interesting word for a new writer. After the excursion, we set the play centre up for the children to be able to access. We got the children to create a menu after we'd been to the pizza shop ourselves, and we had an opportunity to ask parents if they could write menus in their home languages as well. So we were trying really hard to give children opportunities to bring home culture into our play episode. Caroline would come every week, and each week her provocation would take us in a different direction. She talked to the children about advertising. If you're going to set up a cafe, you have to advertise or nobody will come. So she would come with these tasks for us to complete, and they were always literacy based. There's a little sample of it there. Coffee, hot dog, ice cream. They know how to spell ice cream. Gelate maybe. I would like flowers and candles. So you can see the illustration. So very much an emergent writer. One week she came and demanded to know what our fire plan was. So something else that I would never have thought to ask the children to think about. And this is Nathaniel's effort. Can you see number 1? I really like his thinking. Take the money. You can see, obviously, these things were not prompted. We asked the children to think about it and write what they thought. Find all the people, then ring the fire brigade. So he had quite a definite plan. Another idea was this notion of applying for jobs. If you want to work somewhere, you have to write out an application. So we asked the children to think about what they're good at cooking, and good at, I think that says safety. Here you can see the critical thinking and the creative thinking coming into play, trying to get children to extend what they would normally think about and find ways to solve problems that hadn't been presented to them before, and using literacy to do that. Part of the planning for the cafe included things like we had lots of different areas that we thought included literacy. They were quite traditional reading and writing and designing, drawing type activities. When we went to the cafe, recording the jobs, looking at the environmental print, writing a thank you letter, interviewing the chef, and then of course the things that we would normally put in our play centres if we had a cafe or a shop, every opportunity to write, to make lists, to write numbers, to fill out bills, orders, special offers that we saw at the pizza shop when we went. And then of course that notion of the provocation, what would happen if, so that we're extending children's thinking, involving families as much as we could, so invitations to come. And obviously what happened, of course, was the families started coming in with good ideas. One mum said, I can sew, I'll make you some aprons. So we ended up with dress-up clothes, and obviously advertising the cafe, posters and leaflets and so on. And some of the other provocations, thinking about fire regulations, applying for a job, cooking for the cafe, so writing recipes, thinking about hygiene, information about the specials and so on. And then consideration of what families might like at the cafe, different dietary requirements. And one provocation that Caroline brought to us was that she had twins. Caroline herself had twins. And she bought the twin pram with the complaint that she couldn't get it through the door, and what were they going to do about it? And she was quite worried about having two babies and how she was going to feed them while she was at the cafe. And I do have a solution to that. I'll give it to you in a minute. The pizza cafe run for a full term, and it was timetabled to be available to the children at all times. So they had access to engage in play and take it to where they wanted to take it within a time frame that we could manage for the rest of our program. It also allowed opportunity for children to add ideas, and obviously the provocations that were added each week. Caroline came with her baby pram and said, I'm worried if I wanted to come to your cafe, what would you do about this problem? And this was one response. Don't worry, we have a microwave for the baby's bottles. This one I quite like because it shows that we don't have to be good writers, but we can still express our ideas. So if you look very carefully, you'll see the baby's tied to the chair. I think it was probably supposed to be a high chair, but very, very good idea. And then there was this conversation we recorded as part of the project. Child actually came up with that idea. Just sell one. You can see that we also covered things like power roles and perception of genders and roles, because obviously that conversation went a little bit further than what we showed you. So we were able to have that conversation with children. Now that is critical thinking and having to talk through your ideas and justify your thinking. It's really hard to plan for that if you're actually thinking, I'm going to give them opportunity to explain their thinking. It's hard to set up an activity like that. So play gives us that opportunity to do that. We looked at lots and lots of different language, and the vocabulary just mushroomed around what we were talking about, positioning different people and trying to see that people are different and it's okay. We can find ways of getting around that. And of course we did have other stuff going on in the classroom, like text to support this sort of stuff, lots more writing activities. In the end we had to give it away because we had other things to do. But if you have a look at our 6 indicators, you'll see that each one of them has been touched in that particular project. And you're probably thinking now about activities that you've done that have done the same thing. Set something up and the children take it away, and suddenly you've got this really engaging, the children are thrilled and they're willing to learn, and all of that literacy skill that we taught as a result. The block project. It's an example of a play and literacy integrated project that was conducted in year 1 and year 2, so looking at the early years of school. But if you're a preschool teacher and you have these lovely wooden blocks in your classroom, or you build with Lego, or you build with anything, you'll pretty much be able to relate to what happened in this project. The classrooms that participated across 6 schools were all afforded a set of blocks each. It was non-traditional resources in year 1 and year 2, where we more typically see quite formal learning, sit down, writing and reading type activities. The literacy that came out of this project was quite deliberate. I might also say to you that it was also a STEM project, so we were also looking at the engineering skills and the mathematics involved and so on. So because it's an integrated program, I've pulled the literacy out of it for you today, but you'll see lots of other stuff as well. Keeping in mind the same sort of requirements for what we've just seen in the pizza shop is this notion of pre-planning. Now, if you're in a group of teachers, obviously collaborative planning is the best way to go, because we know that block building takes up a lot of room. So you need lots of resources and you need quite a decent size of space. And also the other thing we discovered, that post-planning was a very valid way to record the places the children took it. We couldn't guarantee what the children would do with it. And so by recording them in our post-planning, we had a complete picture of what the project would be. What we did was we got the teachers to post-plan as the project went along, and then from that think about other ways that we could encourage children to use literacy. The thing that we required the teachers to do in their projects was that within these play-based block projects, the children should be required to do some elements of recording. So that included writing, drawing, and recording using labels, diagrams, and even using the technology where possible to take photographs and having children explain their own thinking. This is an example of a provocation that we use. I actually designed this one because the teachers came in and we did some professional learning. We gave them the blocks in groups, they were in table groups, and they had to plan and build a luxury, environmentally friendly holiday resort for a family of 4 to have a luxurious holiday, not just a holiday, a luxurious holiday. There are 4 members in the family. Each member wants to experience a range of activities. So we weren't letting them get out with just a swimming pool, and the team had to decide upon what those activities would be. So you can see the negotiation coming in, the oral language, the critical thinking. So the building challenge then was to create the chalet the family would stay in. It's built on a lake, and so it can only have 6 points of contact with the ground. So that was the challenge. This is an adult challenge, but I reckon by the end of this project, the children were quite capable of doing this. The floor plan had to allow for a minimum of 10 square centimetres per person. So we built a bit of mathematics in there too for a challenge. Some of the questions we asked them was, think about how you would access the chalet. How would you get there? Because it's in the middle of a lake. What features at the resort offer a luxurious holiday? So we kept coming back to this. Think about it. What would you like there? And then they had to record their ideas and thinking. So they had to record what they would have. So this is a list. They had to draw a floor plan before they started with the measurements, and they had to develop advertising materials and take a digital photo of the family, and we gave them little people to put in the chalet when they'd finished to send home to family and friends. So quite a bit of work to be done. You can see that these things take time. If you're doing this in a classroom, it doesn't happen in a day. In fact, it might happen over a week. The talking around the challenge was quite interesting. And I was working with adults and they were then going on to work with their children. And we all found the same thing, is that everybody wants to have an idea, everyone wants to record it. There were different ways of doing it. And it was interesting for me as the presenter that 20 minutes into the building, and we gave them 40, every single group without fail ditched their plan and started again. And that was quite interesting because it gave the teachers an insight into what it's like to try and pre-plan something and then build it to that plan. They weren't satisfied. And we said, will this happen with the children? Do you need to think about that? So it gave them an opportunity to think about, how am I going to structure my block play projects with the children? What am I going to ask them to do? So they found it easier to have their ideas, have their chat, build and then post-draw to say, well, this is what we built. And so that gave them a bit of an insight. And I think if you're going to be planning provocations for the children to do, you should have a go at it first yourself so that you know what the challenges and the pitfalls might be. And obviously, all of the literacy that might come out of that. So lists, drawing and labelled floor plans, advertising materials, discussing ideas, giving instructions, following instructions, explaining your ideas, actually even arguing your idea against somebody else's, applications of creativity, critical thinking. Then there was the physical skills of block building, seeing the connections between people's needs and the building requirements. So that's a different level of critical thinking. And then all the collaborative skills and the social skills that go with that, and the thinking skills as well. So quite a complicated example. This is something that happened at the end of the year. After the children had had a lot of experience with the blocks, this particular teacher decided that rather than the children build a construction and then dismantle it for the next group to come along, she would build a 3-part construction using 3 different groups. So you can see across the top, reptiles, birds, insects was the name of the group, and each group had something to do to add to the zoo. They were looking at zoos at this stage. The reptile group had to build a habitat for the Asian elephants with a pool for them to splash in, build a habitat for the zebra. It must be able to fit 4 zebras, so they had models that they had to measure and make sure there was enough room for 4. They had to build a picnic area for people to eat and relax. I think this classroom may have gone to the zoo in the meantime, and the picnic area cannot be next to the Asian elephant. So there is a sort of double whammy thinking about. And then the next group would come and add to it, and they had to label and so on. Another teacher wrote this provocation with the children, so once again co-constructing texts and going into being architects. So create a house with a bedroom, only one, a kitchen, a bathroom and a living room. It must have a roof that covers all the rooms, a backyard that needs a place to keep dry if it rains, a shady spot if it's sunny, and at least 3 things to play on. It's pretty complicated, and don't forget these were year 1s and year 2s, but if you had a very active group of preschoolers who are extremely experienced at building, this would be quite a nice challenge for them too. The provocation itself is kept in the classroom. The teacher would co-read it with the children who couldn't read, or they would find another competent other to help them to read it. So that zone of proximate development happening all the time in these classrooms to help children navigate their literacy skills. We were very adamant that this was not just about letting the children play with blocks. We had to build the literacy and other skills in. So you can see here, this is just one example, and there are many examples that we've got coming out of this project. But they had to pre-draw. This group at this point was building some sort of castle for some superhero. A lot of time was spent in getting them to do the planning before they actually went to build. And it was a requirement that they wrote as much as possible. So here you can see it's labelled. This is a candy shop with an oven and the bus parking over there. They had an aerodrome going for this really rich guy, and so on and so forth. You'll see in the background too that there's a tunnel built with the bits of carpet, and this space was shared by 4 classrooms, so they had to roster on and off. It was quite a challenge for them all. Because of course, once one group started to build, all the other groups wanted to see what was going on and give them advice. This sort of thing was planned and programmed in the teachers' learning time in the afternoons mostly, so they considered that it was part of their literacy program and their maths program. This requirement to write was threaded throughout all the programs. In this particular classroom, this teacher was very, very clever at including her technology. So she's got an electronic whiteboard in the classroom. These children were in a school that was opposite quite a large open space with a lake, and the teacher wanted them to draw the lake and recreate it with the blocks. So she used Google Earth up there on the whiteboard. And the children, they'd also been over to the lake. So they're having all of this experience to draw from. I love this photograph of this little guy here in the corner, because what he's got as part of the resources that she had in the blocks was, it's a plastic plant in a plastic pot, And he's measuring it. We watched him measure it very carefully to see whereabouts it would fit in his lake construction. And so he went back several times to measure to make sure he had the right spot for it. The other drawings, you can see the children there drawing. They were also asked to label when their drawings are finished. Here's some examples of the labelling, the recording elements. In the zoo construction, they had to label each part as they went. And here, when we're making this luxury residence for a very rich person, it's got an underground exit, and there was a sign at the other side that said entry. The architectural brief also was one of those projects that the children were so involved in it that the teacher couldn't bear to ask them to take it down. So it stayed up for several days and they continued to build and add to it. But that would also depend on your classroom, whether you've got the luxury of being able to leave things out. And I think if you can do that sometimes, it once again extends children's thinking, and you can find other ways to introduce literacy tasks and get them to extend their thinking there. This particular teacher was using the block-based play activities to get the children to demonstrate their understanding of the science and HASS program that they were doing. They went to a wildlife park where they were doing study of the West Australian fauna and flora, and they had quite a bit of knowledge about the local area. So what the teacher asked them to do was to choose one of the animals that they'd investigated and build it with the blocks. The one on the left, it's a swan. The one in the middle, it's a kangaroo. It's not a very good photo. I was watching this little girl build this kangaroo. You see those two round things on the top? That's the ears. But I can't begin to tell you how long it took her to stop them sliding off the edge. And I was just at the point of going, why don't you use something else? And I'm really glad I didn't, because she managed to get the balance just right. The one on the right, it's a snake with its water and food. And so they had to create the environment as well. What the teacher then went on to do, not just leaving it there, of course, because we wanted to think about how you would use this in your literacy program, she got the children to take the photos on the iPad, which she then printed off, and they used to write a report about the animal. And of course, and once again, these are year one children, they're a little bit older, but I'm pretty sure that if you did that in preschool, you'd be quite happy with what the children actually, they could draw, they could write the words they know, they could begin to sound out the words they know, and you could provide support through word walls or helping them to spell, bringing their attention to the letters that they would need, and so on and so forth. So quite a bit involved in that project, which can be adapted for older children or can be adapted for younger children. But the idea being that play is the context, but literacy learning is at the heart of that, and the educator's role is key to all of it. With all of these projects, we always think about how can we record what's happened, how can we evaluate how the children are progressing, or whether we're hitting the targets and the indicators that we wanted. And this is just an example that we used with our teachers to show that they could actually, at any time, they could change any of those headings across. If you wanted to focus on mathematics, you could take out literacy skills and put mathematics skills in there. If you wanted to do the engineering skills, you could do that. We tried to get them to see that what we wanted them to do was to take the time to watch the children play. And that was key to some of the planning that would happen after they'd set things up. The teachers would sit down with their checklists that they'd created, or use this one or any they like, and they simply and quickly were able to indicate where the children were at in their literacy progress. Were they taking risks? Were they posing questions? Were they answering questions? And were they querying each other's ideas? Were they using the technology? Were they writing independently? Were they confident to have a go at writing, or did they feel like they needed more support? Checklists are pretty one-dimensional unless you've got comments. So we gave them an opportunity to comment, needed help, didn't need help, was able to work independently, didn't like working in a group, which some children didn't, which was rather lovely too, because they soon learnt that they couldn't play in the play centre unless they actually worked with someone else. In the course of the year, we saw lots of changes to teachers' pedagogy around play-based learning, particularly because, I don't know if it's the same here, but in Western Australia, many of our Year 1 and Year 2 teachers are not early childhood trained. They are primary trained, and while they know and understand the principles of play, until you actually teach it and respect that, guided play is quite a complex project to put together, and being able to hand over the power to the children was something that not all of them were comfortable with doing. Part of the project involved us going along and watching what was happening and coaching the teachers along the way. One of the schools in particular, they were really dedicated. They really wanted to do play-based learning in their junior primary area. They were very, very keen, but when we went the first day, it was so teacher-driven. It was so teacher-driven they didn't even know that they were doing it. The teacher had put a piece of tape on the carpet and next to the blocks and said, don't let the blocks come out of that area. That's as far as you can go. She'd also told them exactly what they had to build and exactly what she wanted to see, because she had an imperative for a particular learning outcome. We said, what you've done is a great start, but actually it's not play. What you've done is you've done a teacher-directed building activity. We talked her through that you have to allow the children to come up with the ideas, and you can guide and you can provide resources and you can step in, but you have to step out and let the children. And we run another couple of sessions. We encourage them to use what we call spare parts. You might do the same. And spare parts is pretty much anything you can lay your hands on for free. So plastic containers, sticks out of the garden, rocks, gum nuts, we had the lot. And from that first session, and when we went to see her the last session, there were blocks everywhere in that classroom, and the children had been engaged in the block building, coming in and out of doing other formal activities, going back, adding to their play. We were standing watching. She was so relaxed, like compared to the first time we went, where she was really uptight about getting those learning outcomes done. I said to her, you're going to run out of blocks. They've done this amazing, we're sort of like going like this in the middle. She said, it doesn't worry. When they run out of blocks, they'll find something else. And sure enough, there was a little fence being built with gum nuts, followed by rocks. And so she had completely flipped her pedagogy. And she said to me, when I first started, I thought, how would we get through all their work? But now I realise play is the work. And it gave me goosebumps, because she saw that she could reach the curriculum imperatives by allowing the children that freedom. So we were rather thrilled with that. And that school actually ended their year in a celebration. They called it the Play Extravaganza. They got all the children from all the classroom year levels, from kindergarten, Year 1, Year 2. They set up play activities outside on the verandas, in the classrooms, where they put the children into mixed groups, which I thought was brilliant, because they didn't do anything but stand back and watch. So the older children and the younger children went from provocation to provocation. Here they had to build a cubby, there they had to build a wall, here they had to work out who the lightest person was, and they had to do... And so it went on, and the whole morning was this lovely play extravaganza, and they've got great plans for this year, so we're busting to get back out there and see what they're doing. Documenting and assessing play, continuing, I'm not so sure I would probably change assessing to evaluating, but it's a softer word because it's not a test, but some other ideas. Obviously, if you're an early childhood educator, you would have heard about pedagogical documentation, you would have heard about floor books, and so you might use those to record the story, get the children to help you. Anecdotal notes, obviously. All of the work samples that children produce, photographs of stuff, and checklists of the knowledge that they've shown, individual portfolios and journals, and I think if you've got older, more competent children, you should be encouraging them to add to their portfolio and journals, all their designs and lists and posters and letters, asking them to reflect back on their learning. In that respect, one of the teachers, and the children were a little bit older, but she had taught them how to video on the iPad, and each week was their task to get the iPad, and they had to create a short video. The audience was their parents, and they had to show the parents what they'd been doing in the block project, because the parents were very, at first, a little bit nervous about, do we want our Year 1s and 2s playing in blocks, or do we want them learning to read and write? And they would have to do a little vlog, she called it a vlog, and they had to tell the parents what they'd been doing that afternoon. They had to explain what they were very proud of in what they'd achieved on that day, and also what they found challenging. Those vlogs were then uploaded in a safe environment the school had provided, where they could access it and see. In keeping with that idea that we stay in touch with families and include them, parents, if they were a bit worried, could see where the child was telling them, this is what I've learnt, and this is what I'm struggling with, and so on. And obviously a digital product at the end. You have links to some other resources that I thought might be interesting.